The funeral home should have been empty. A homeless man named John was being buried that morning. A potter's field, a pine box, no mourners. Margaret had made the arrangements herself, but the street outside was choked with black SUVs. Men in dark suits with coiled earpieces scanned the sidewalk. This was not a pauper's farewell.
This can't be right. The city sent me a letter. Pauper's burial. No service unless I paid.
She stepped inside and saw 3 people seated in the back pew who did not belong in any funeral for a homeless man.
Senator Royce, Marcus Brecken, Claire Hurst. I've seen them on television, not in a funeral home for John.
A funeral director touched her arm. "Miss, this is a private service. I think you may be in the wrong place."
No, I am here for John. I am the one who made the arrangements.
Before the director could answer, a uniformed man strode up the aisle, a private jet pilot, cap in hand, a cream envelope held out to her.
Miss Margaret, he left instructions. This is for you.
Margaret took the envelope, her name in elegant cursive. Inside, the feel of a small key. 7 years of Fridays had never prepared her for this. 7 years earlier, the bench behind the ER was a different waiting room. Nobody waited there for healing, only for the cold to pass. Margaret walked into the November air, feet aching, scrubs stained, another night shift that left nothing but exhaustion, and then she saw him. A heap of blankets that turned out to be a man. White beard, hollow cheeks, a gash across his knuckles dripping red. She didn't think, just walked over and crouched down. He flinched, pulling his hand back like a wounded animal.
It's okay. I am a nurse. Let me look at that before it gets infected.
You don't need to worry about me. I'm already past saving.
Margaret ignored him, opened a small kit. She cleaned the cut with steady hands, the same hands that had held 100 patients tonight. When she finished, she pressed her sandwich into his good hand. He stared at it like a foreign object. He looked up, and for a moment, the weariness in his eyes peeled back. Something sharp flickered before he lowered his gaze.
I'll check on him next Friday, just to make sure the wound doesn't get infected.
The next Friday, she came with bandages and an extra sandwich, and the Friday after that. Soon, it was just what Margaret did on Fridays. John never asked for anything, but he started to expect her. The hunch in his shoulders relaxed a degree when he heard her footsteps.
You know, if you told me your last name, I could check if there's a bed for you at the shelter.
Home is wherever you stop running. This bench is safer than any shelter.
She noticed his hands then. The fingers were long, the nails clean beneath the street grime. Hands that had never held a jackhammer.
He speaks like a man who's read 1,000 books, and his hands haven't seen decades of manual work. Who is he?
But she didn't press. Whatever he was hiding, she could tell the weight of it was more than anyone should carry alone.
You treat wounds like you are mending more than skin, Miss Margaret. That's rare.
I just do what I was trained to do. But you never let me do anything for that cough of yours.
And so the months passed, the seasons changing around that one bench. Becoming a year, Margaret stopped asking. He stopped flinching. The second winter was worse. Snow buried the bench, and John's cough had turned deep and wet. His hands shook like a man fighting a current. Margaret arrived with a thermos of hot soup, her scrubs already cold against her skin. He was barely conscious, his lips pale.
John, you can't stay out here tonight. Let me bring you inside, just to the waiting room, please.
Number. I am already home, Margaret. Safer out here than anywhere, with walls.
Without a word, Margaret peeled off her own black peacoat and wrapped it around his shoulders, her gold cross catching the streetlight. As she adjusted the collar, a folded bill slipped from his pocket and landed in the snow. A crisp $100 bill, uncreased, almost new.
$100. That's not street money. That's from a bank. Maybe even a wallet.
John didn't notice. He was too busy pulling her coat tighter, his eyes closed, his breath a thin mist. She tucked the bill back into the pocket of his worn jacket, her fingers slow, her mind racing. She didn't ask, she just sat beside him in the snow, watching his breath steam, holding a mystery she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. Spring thawed the snow, and John lived. But Margaret's curiosity didn't thaw with it. She started digging. Missing persons, veteran registries, old newspaper archives. John's face stared back from none of them.
There's no record. It's like he doesn't exist.
One night shift, she asked Rachel, the youngest nurse on the floor.
A homeless John? Margaret, half the DC homeless are named John. He's probably just a vet with a bad memory.
But Margaret wasn't convinced. The next Friday, she sat beside him and tried once more.
It's safer for both of us. If you don't know my last name, Miss Margaret, just John, that's enough.
Weeks later, her mother passed. The funeral was quiet, just Margaret and a pastor. After that, the bench became her only comfort. She stopped searching. Every Friday, she just brought food and sat with him, the silence no longer needing to be filled. Some mysteries, she decided, were meant to be carried, not solved. By year 6, John's hands trembled constantly, and his breathing had thinned to a wet rasp. The color never returned to his face.
John, please. Just one night inside the ER. Let me run an IV, give you oxygen.
Number, you've done more than medicine already. Just sit with me tonight.
She did. And after a long silence, he turned her hand over like he was reading the lines of her palm.
If you ever find out who I was, promise me you'll use it for them, the next ones, not for yourself.
The next ones? What does that mean, John? I don't understand.
You'll know. When I am gone, you'll know. Just promise me, Margaret.
I promise. I promise.
He nodded, and the tension in his shoulders dissolved. He looked lighter than he had in years. Margaret held his hand until his breathing evened out, carrying a promise she did not understand into the coming dark. A Friday in late autumn, the bench stood empty, a threadbare wool blanket draped across the slats like a shed skin.
John? He's never gone. He never leaves.
She found him behind the bench, collapsed face down, one hand still curled around the edge of his flask. She rolled him over, pressed her fingers to his neck, and started CPR, counting compressions in a voice that broke. The ambulance came, but the paramedics moved slowly, no siren on the way back. She rode in the front, staring at nothing. In the cold morgue, they handed her a clear plastic bag, a worn Bible, a silver flask, and a single military dog tag. The tag was tarnished, but the stamp was clear. Wainwright, J below it, a string of numbers.
Wainwright. He had a name. All these years, and I never knew.
She sat at her kitchen table that night, the bag open, the dog tag beside her coffee cup. She didn't sleep. 7 years of Fridays, and only in death did John finally give up his real name. 3 days after the morgue, a form letter from the city arrived. Pauper's burial in a potter's field. No service, no name. Margaret sat at her kitchen table, still in scrubs. She called a modest funeral home 3 blocks from the hospital. She paid for a viewing. No obituary, no invitations. She expected an empty room, just her and a casket. But when she turned the corner, black SUVs lined the curb. Men in dark suits scanned the street with coiled earpieces.
This is the wrong address. It has to be.
She pushed through the door anyway, into a chapel lit by candles and tense silence. The guest book sat open on a wooden stand. The first entry made her freeze. Senator David Royce, Marcus Brecken, Claire Hurst. Their names in heavy black ink. She lifted her head. In the back pew, 3 figures sat who did not belong in any funeral for a homeless man. They were here for John. A homeless man whose funeral should have been empty was drawing the most powerful people in the country. The service began with the quiet rustle of expensive suits. Senator David Royce stepped to the podium, his face set in granite.
He was the bravest man I ever knew, a patriot who gave more than his country ever asked.
I've been holding this envelope for hours. Why can't I bring myself to open it?
A hand touched her shoulder. Captain Harris had slipped into the pew behind her. He leaned close.
He wanted you to read it now, before the service ends.
She tore the seal. A small brass key tumbled into her palm, cold and heavy. Behind the key, thick cream paper covered in John's neat cursive, the handwriting of a careful man. Her hands, the same hands that had bandaged him dozens of times, now trembled as she unfolded the page.
The first line. And I already know this letter will break me open.
Royce continued, his voice thick with old grief, but Margaret no longer heard a word. Dear Margaret, if you are reading this, I have finally gone home. My real name is Jonathan Wainwright. I imagine you've already found the dog tag.
Jonathan Wainwright, the defector they said burned alive in a car crash in 1987. He's been alive this whole time.
He wrote of stolen secrets, midnight exchanges on foggy DC streets, a life spent hunted by the enemies he'd made. I hid on that bench because you were the first person in 30 years who saw a man, not a threat. You treated my hand, not my file.
He remembered every Friday, every sandwich, and I never even knew his last name.
The key opens a safety deposit box at Rothschild Bank in Zurich. Inside is $47 million. Use it on the next 7 people.
The next ones. That's what he meant that night. He's asking me to be his hands now.
She folded the letter with trembling hands. The senator's eulogy became a distant murmur, words about service and honor, washing over her without landing. John the homeless man was dead, but Jonathan Wainwright, the defector and hidden titan, had just placed an impossible weight in her palms, a fortune and a command. The organ fell silent. Mourners left, but Margaret stayed, clutching the letter. A shadow fell. Marcus Brecken, his hand extended, his eyes raw.
He told me about you. Encrypted calls. You kept him human when the world made him a ghost.
Encrypted calls? Who was he that he needed that?
Then Claire Hurst, the former secretary, pulled her into a tight hug.
He saved my career in '86. I owe him everything. You gave him peace.
Senator Royce clasped her hand, murmuring thanks that carried decades of secrets.
They came for a homeless man. And I am the nurse who gave him sandwiches.
She finally rose, the key in her palm, and walked past the empty pews. At the door, she looked back. The casket was alone. She stepped into the cold, the key a heavy promise. She didn't go to bed. At her kitchen table, she opened her laptop and typed Jonathan Wainwright. Old headlines filled the screen. Defector presumed dead in fiery crash. Below, a photograph of a young man in a tuxedo at a state dinner. The same sharp eyes she'd bandaged for 7 years, now looking out from a world of power and polished marble.
That's him. The same hands. How did he end up on a bench?
One article quoted a Swiss banker. Wainwright moved billions through untraceable channels, a ghost in the global system. The key lay beside her laptop, catching the screen's glow. She picked up the phone. The number for Rothschild Bank was printed on the letter. She dialed, her fingers unsteady. A crisp voice confirmed the balance. $47 million, and a sealed instruction waiting for her authorization.
47 million. It's real.
She set the phone down, then opened the bank's secure portal. The number appeared on the screen, cold, unmoving, hers. She closed the laptop, but the number blazed behind her eyelids. 47 million of somebody else's money, now resting in her name.
I could pay off the student loans, move into a real apartment, never work another double shift in my life. No one would know. The bank said it was mine to spend. John never wanted it.
But then she remembered a cold night 6 years ago. His voice hoarse, hoarse, cutting through the wind.
You see people the way I used to see numbers. That's rarer than 47 million.
He didn't give me this for a new car. He gave it for the next 7 people I haven't even met yet.
She picked up the key, felt its weight, and pressed it against her palm until the metal warmed.
I promised him, and a promise to a dead man is still a promise.
But her hand didn't loosen around the key. The struggle between what she could have and what she owed was far from over. She sat until dawn bled through the curtains, the fortune untouched, the promise untested. By mid-morning, she stood in the Potter's Field Cemetery, a cold wind snapping her peacoat. The grave was a raw mound of dirt with a temporary marker, John Doe. She knelt, ignoring the damp seeping through her scrubs, and laid her hand on the frozen earth.
I didn't even know your real name until your funeral. How do I know what you want me to do?
Use it on the next 7 people. That's all I ask.
The next 7. Not me. Never me.
She closed her eyes and saw the $100 bill in the snow, the flask, the trembling hands, all the moments he'd chosen poverty to survive.
I'll do it, John. I'll find the next 7. I'll use every penny the way you asked.
Her voice broke, but the words held. The key felt lighter in her grip, as if the decision had taken its weight.
He trusted me with this. I don't know how, but I'll figure it out.
She walked away from the grave, no longer a nurse visiting a homeless man, but a steward of an invisible fortune and a promise she intended to keep. She spent weeks bent over her laptop, studying how other cities ran street medicine programs, taking meticulous notes in a spiral notebook.
7 hospitals. 7 Friday night teams. That's how you scatter 47 million.
She drafted a 1-page proposal with John's handwritten instructions scanned at the top. Use it on the next 7. Her first call was to the foundation director at Georgetown University Hospital. The man listened in silence, then asked if she was serious.
I am an ER nurse, and I am holding a promise from a dead man who was worth more than this hospital. Yes, I am serious.
Within a month, she sat in a conference room with administrators, presenting the framework for 7 Friday night mobile clinics. They signed, one by one. 7 hospitals committed to staffing the vans, and she committed to funding them in perpetuity. She named it the John's Promise Fund. The logo a simple wooden bench, the same one she'd sat on for 7 years. She authorized the first wire transfer, $5 million to Georgetown, enough to launch the first Friday night van. The bank portal refreshed. 42 million remained. The plan was no longer a promise whispered to a grave. It was a fleet of vans with John's name on every door. The first Friday night, the van rolled out. A cold drizzle fell on a DC neighborhood that hadn't seen a doctor in years. Margaret stepped out in a blue volunteer vest, her scrubs underneath, the same gold cross at her throat.
Ma'am, I am a nurse. Do you need someone to look at that?
The woman had an infected foot and flinched like a wounded animal. Margaret cleaned it with the same steady hands she'd used on John. The woman whispered, "Thank you, miss," and Margaret's eyes stung. The same gratitude she'd seen in a scruffy man on a bench. A local news van pulled up, a reporter asking who funded a mobile clinic in this forgotten corner.
It's called John's Promise. He asked me to use it for the next 7. This is the first.
The story aired the next morning. Within a week, 7 hospitals confirmed their Friday night programs were operational, and the phones wouldn't stop ringing.
7 vans, 7 nights, and John's name on every door. He would have hated the attention, but he would have loved the work.
As the first van pulled away, she felt a hand on her shoulder that wasn't there, a phantom pressure, warm and approving. Within weeks, the hospital board reviewed the still uncashed checks and the news footage. A unanimous vote, they would install a permanent memorial at the bench site. Margaret ordered the plaque herself, a simple brass rectangle, no dates, just the words John had spoken. The old bench was dismantled, its splintered wood saved for the foundation's office. In its place, a broad oak bench set into fresh concrete, The plaque was fixed to the backrest, but a black cloth was drawn over it, waiting for the anniversary of his death.
A year ago today, I found him on the ground. Now a bench waits.
The unveiling was scheduled for a Friday, just before sunset, the hour she'd always brought him sandwiches. Nurses, patients, and the powerful figures who had first appeared at John's funeral all returned for this moment.
He would have hated this ceremony, but the bench he would have loved.
She held the edge of the cloth, waiting for the appointed minute. The city's church bells began to toll, but before the cloth fell, the final chapter belonged to the quiet before, the promise kept, the bench itself a silent witness. With one pull, Margaret drew the black cloth away. The brass caught the last light of the setting sun. For John, he was already home. The crowd of nurses, former patients, and the powerful figures from the funeral applauded softly, the sound like rain on leaves.
He told me once this bench was the safest place on earth. Now it's a home for anyone who needs one. The next ones, John. The ones you never met.
Claire Hurst stepped forward, pulling Margaret into a wordless embrace. Marcus Brecken placed a hand on her shoulder. His eyes wet, Senator Royce clasped her hand, his grip firm. He'd be proud of you. We all are.
This bench is home now, for anyone who needs it.
As the sun dipped below the rooftops, the brass plaque glowed like a small, still flame. The ceremony ended, leaving the bench alone under the streetlight, as it would be every Friday night. Margaret stood at the hospital window, watching the bench from above, a quiet smile on her lips. When her shift ended at midnight, Margaret walked out the same ER doors she'd used for 17 years and sat on the new bench.
I sat here every Friday for 7 years and I never knew your name. Now your name is on a bench.
You see people the way I used to see numbers. That's rarer than 47 million.
I see them now, John. The next ones. They're out here every night. And I'll keep showing up.
She felt no ghost, only the weight of a promise kept, settling into her bones like warmth. The old bench was gone, but the space felt full. Not with absence, but with purpose. For a long while she stayed, listening to the city's distant hum, the rustle of leaves under the street lamp. When she finally rose, the moon had shifted, and the bench's shadow stretched long across the pavement. She paused at the door, looked back, and nodded, just once, to the empty bench.
Home at last, John. For both of us.
It began with a bleeding hand on a cold bench, a sandwich pressed into a stranger's palm. Every Friday, through rain and snow, she brought what she had. Bandages, soup, the coat off her own back. There was a $100 bill in the snow, a silver flask, eyes that had seen empires fall. She never asked. She just kept showing up, because that's what you do when someone is alone in the dark. And when he died, she discovered he was a Cold War defector, a billionaire financier, and that he'd left her $47 million. But she didn't keep a cent. She scattered it into 7 Friday night clinics, each one a promise to the next ones. Now, every Friday, a white van rolls into forgotten corners, and a volunteer kneels beside someone untouched by kindness for years. The same hands that cleaned John's wounds now train others to do the same, and his name is on every van door and on a bench behind the hospital. A brass plaque catches the light, bearing the only truth that ever mattered, because one woman's quiet Fridays became a city's answer to the cold, and a homeless man's final request became a home for the next 7. Another Friday night settled over the hospital. The street lamps flickered on above the memorial bench. Inside the ER, Margaret stood by the window in her blue volunteer vest, a thermos forgotten in her hand. Below, a woman in a thin coat shuffled out of the dark. She touched the bench like a question, then lay down with her head beside the brass plaque.
That's right. That bench was built for you.
Margaret let the curtain fall and turned back toward the bustle of the ER. The triage board glowed red, more patients waiting, more hands needed. She hung her vest by the door and pulled on her gloves, the same steady hands ready for the night. Outside, the homeless woman slept peacefully, the plaque glowing above her. The bench had become exactly what John had promised, a home for the next ones. Margaret worked through the night, and when dawn broke, the bench was empty again, waiting. As the sun rose, a single sparrow alighted on the backrest, its head tilting at the plaque. The city stirred, distant sirens, the rumble of the first bus. On the bench, where a homeless man had once shivered, the brass words caught the light. John had no home, but he gave a home to everyone who sat there. And the new bench waited, not as a memorial to a ghost, but as a promise for the next one. The sparrow flew, the street filled with early commuters. The plaque remained, a silent sentinel against the cold. And Margaret, finishing her shift, walked past the window and saw the empty bench, and she smiled. She didn't stop. She had work to do, but outside, the bench held the morning sun like a keeper of promises, waiting for night.